Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to show you something that was inspiring for spring and coming into summertime. I have this print that I didn't love, so I ended up going over it with some paint and gesso, and I'll show you how I got to this result. But to get started, I wanted to show you how I made my prints. As you can tell, the theme I'm going for is bees and honeycomb. So I have this honeycomb die cut that I had gotten from Amazon, and I'll link the one that I got in the description below. And I used this foam. It's a sticky backed foam, craft foam, and I have a pack of them in different colors. And I like to use these to make my own homemade stamps. For the first part that I have the two together, I'm just going to use that one loose so that I can get different areas. But then as the little pieces started popping out, I started sticking those onto this piece of cardboard and then putting different textures on there. And then I realized I should have some flowers as well. So I did the same thing with these Spellbinder Glimmer Hot foil die cuts. I just cut out the flowers. And for the part that you're supposed to foil, I just used that to emboss the foam. And then the same thing, it's on the sticky back. So I just adhered those to this piece of cardboard. And then I knew that if I left it like this, I was going to get these harsh edges from the cardboard. So I decided to cut around each of the flowers. It was the 3 together and the 2 together, just so that it can look a little bit more like a stamp. For the paper today, I'm going to use 110-pound Nina White cardstock. I was trying this new technique that I didn't try before, but I wanted to see if I put alcohol lift ink, or I guess it's just alcohol lift, on the gel plates first, if that would help move the alcohol once I started adding the color. I started with a teak wood brown, and I just put those in the corners and on the edges. And then I brought in some of the sienna, which is like a warmer tone of brown. I also brought in my 91% alcohol. Then I just used my blower tool to combine and kind of blow out the alcohol, but I also kept coming back in with my 91% alcohol just to make sure it could move. So one thing I learned with this technique is that the alcohol lift does not work well to be put on the plate before you pull your print. It did a strange thing where the alcohol inks actually didn't move at all, and I had to keep coming back in with more and more of the alcohol, and then when it dried, it had this kind of gritty texture to it. So I definitely don't recommend using the alcohol lift on the bottom layer. Then I began to add more of my yellows. I added a honeycomb, a sunshine yellow, and then I added in some boysenberry, some purple. The tricky part is knowing when to be able to come in with your textures when it comes to alcohol ink. If it's too wet, it will kind of blend itself back out again and it won't maintain that texture. If it's too dry, it may not pick up the texture or it may be more grainy. So it is kind of a tricky thing. As I see part of the plate drying, I try to come in with my stamps and pull the textures out. And then for the parts that haven't dried yet, I'll come in with my blower and try to dry them a little bit, but not too much. And then just kind of keep going back and forth. If I put my texture down and it's too wet, it just kind of bleeds back out. That's okay. I can just use my blower, blow it back out, wait for it to dry a little bit, and then keep coming in with my texture. So that's kind of the process that I'm using throughout this session. To add the look of text, I have this embossed piece of cardstock. This is the 140-pound heavyweight cardstock. And I just kind of rolled that in some areas just to give the look of a little bit of script. The other thing I noticed about the alcohol lift on the bottom layer is that my alcohols, the inks were not drying on the top of it. So I ended up just putting this piece of paper down. This is the 110-pound Nina White cardstock. And I just pressed in and you could start to see the alcohol come through the top. And I removed it just to pull away what wasn't drying. I didn't like how it looked, so I set it off to the side, and as I was Gelli printing the rest of my prints, I was stamping off onto this and brayering off with gold onto this until I got this look here. I didn't show the process of me filling it in with all of this, but I just wanted to show you. Then I put some block out white over the top of what was left on my gel plate. Initially, I was just going to clean off my gel plate to get a fresh start, but I started to see some of that alcohol seep through a little bit, so I thought I might add some of my textures in. Plus, I could add the acrylic paint over the top of these stamps, and that would kind of seal them so that those colors don't blend right back in when I use this on my next alcohol print. I get asked about this next texture a lot. This is a crackle look, and what it's used for is supposed to be for glass paints by Plaid, and I'll put the link in the description for where you could get one of these. I think they sell them on Amazon. I got mine at Michael's and I love this. Anyway, it creates a great texture as like a stained glass look. And what I did is once that white dried completely, I added some gold, some iridescent bright gold, brayered that out, and then I used my 110-pound Nina White cardstock. And this candle lid as a Baron. And this was a tip from Avenel, one of my viewers. Another tip that Avenel gave me recently that I just started after I was done with these prints is to have a little container with some warm water and some of the Murphy's oil or Murphy soap. So I did that. I had a pan that I just had picked up at Dollar Tree. She uses a kitty litter box, but I already had one of those foil ones. So I did that, and I put my brayers in it after I was done jelly printing, and the paint is just bubbling right up. So this is the print that I got, and I love how the gold shines through with that crackle effect. So these are very muted in color, but I like them. So I wanted to go in with my alcohol hand sanitizer. This is 62%, and I put that on my background instead of the alcohol lift. And this time I brayered it out, and then I added in my colors in much the same way. But one of the colors I added in was Villainous, and it's a metallic color, like a pearl. And you do have to shake those ahead of time. But if you're going to add any pearls or metallics from alcohol inks, at least from Ranger, you'd want to also put down your blending solution first, then put that down, and then put a little blending solution over the top. I forgot to put it on the bottom of it, so the ones that didn't blend out and they looked like clumps, that's because I didn't use my blending solution first. So if you have that happening and you don't want that to happen, just put down that blending solution and that should take care of it. But I just kind of kept going and blended it out, and I didn't care if it had a little bit of clumps in it. So that's the process that I used. And then same thing as I did on the last print, I started with some darker colors towards the top and bottom on this one, and then I saved the inside part for my yellows and oranges. I also brought in some of my pool blue color, like a turquoise. I wanted to have a little bit of a look of some sky in these prints. Then I used my blow dryer to make sure these backgrounds were completely dry before I went in with my blockout white again. The nice thing about using the white is that most of the time you're going to get that alcohol ink to kind of bleed out just a little bit. And so by using the white, it just kind of gives it a neutral color to bleed out onto. And most of my white turns into the color of the background, so it's not like a stark white anyways. And then I will layer in some more of that texture on this white layer, and that way I can get kind of the look of some dimensional texture in these prints. This gold is from Master's Touch, and this is also an iridescent bright gold, but just a different brand. I didn't put out too much paint, but that was okay because this was the gold that I used to brayer off onto that one first print that I had made to kind of make it look like it had some honey colored gold on that print, since I didn't get a chance to add any metallics to it. This one turned out a lot more like what I was visualizing. I wanted pops of purple and then the yellow and orange together and that gold that shows through, and then a little bit of blue here and there. So I thought this one looked really pretty. I love how the colors kind of came together, and this one had that Villainous Pearl alcohol ink in it, and I thought that those all blended together so nicely. Before my print dried completely after pulling it, I was able to go in with this turquoise blue foil that I had, and I rubbed it in any areas that looked like they could have still been wet or had thicker areas of paint. And I was able to remove some of this foil onto the background just to give it a little bit of extra shine. So here's a closer look at the completed prints that I just made. I've got these really bright ones with the purple, blue, yellow, and the nice background texture. I really like how the text comes through on this one with the gold. And then I've got the lighter version that's more muted in color. And then I've got the one that I'm going to turn into something else. So the one that I didn't love as much, and here is how I'm going to alter it. I pulled out some distress inks and some stamps. Stamps that I picked had some bees or some honeycombs in them or some flowers. And I had this die cut of the cardstock of my honeycomb, and I used that as a stencil. So I just started using my tea dye, and this is the distress ink, but my ink was kind of dry, so I wasn't getting a lot of good color happening. So I pulled out some vintage photo and rusty Hinge distress oxide ink, which are much juicier and definitely a little bit darker than what my tea dye ink was giving me. And I mixed these colors, just kind of a little bit of the vintage photo and then a little bit of the rusty Hinge, and just kind of blended those out in different areas. And I had a fumble, but no worries, nobody was hurt during this. And then once I removed the stencil, there was a bright white line left, so I just took what was left on my blending tool and I kind of blended in the color just in that white area so it wasn't a stark white. I also brought in some wild honey to give a little bit of a yellow-orange glow to it. Next, I brought in some stamping using my VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And again, I pulled out some bees and I just started stamping those in different areas. The bees I have, some of them look like they're flying or resting on a flower, and then others look like they're in flight. I also added in some flowers, and brought those in kind of on the bottom and a little bit on the sides and on the top. I really like these bigger bumblebees, and I used them in different directions so that they didn't look the exact same as I was building my composition. One of my stamp sets had this very large hexagon shape, and so I used that and repeat stamped that around the background area just to break up some of the area here. And I didn't always re-ink it, so sometimes I would just ink it once and then stamp it out a few times to have the honeycomb and kind of have it fading out. Next, I brought in some acrylic gesso. This is also from Master's Touch, which is Hobby Lobby brand. And I just used the white that was on the lid because I shook mine up, and then just whatever was left on the lid is what I used as my little palette here. And the nice thing about using gesso is it isn't a total block-out coverage of white. It will reveal some of the design underneath it if you do a light enough layer, especially if you mix a little bit of water with it. It just gives it a nice kind of a milky covering, and it will make it so that these little honeycomb areas will stand out and have a little bit of a different coloring to them than the rest of it. So I just added this to the insides of these hexagon shapes to give it the look of the honeycomb, and then I just kind of went around the whole paper until all of those were filled out. Once I was done with the hexagons, then I just brought in a little bit of the gesso around parts of the border to kind of blend in where the distress inks and the jelly print kind of meet. Also, I put some gesso over some of the flowers so it looked like some of the flowers were in the background. I like the honeycombs, but I wanted to add some color to them, so I took some gesso and I added some of my alcohol inks to them and mixed them up with a palette knife until I got the color that I was looking for. I wanted a yellow, a purple, and a green. And so I just mixed those up so that I can bring them into different areas of my background. This time I'm using a 2-inch round brush, and I'm doing the same thing I did with the white, but this time I'm bringing the color in, and I have yellow right now, and I did this honeycomb all yellow, but then I thought it would be nice if I had some different colors in these honeycombs, so I started blending in the yellow and the purple, the yellow and the green. I just wanted a variation of colors in these different hexagons. Once I was working on the bees, I thought it would be nice if I put some of the yellow in the wings, but then I realized it was kind of blending in with the hexagons, so I brought in some blue with my pool alcohol ink, and I mixed that with the white gesso, and I brought that into the wing area. I used the yellow on the bodies of the bees so that it looked like they were yellow and black. I added in some purple into the flower petals, and I mixed that with some yellows and blues, and just wanted to give a little bit of variation to the different flowers. I used my green to color the petals and the stems. And this way there weren't any real harsh lines on my flowers. The only harsh lines left were on the bees and some of the hexagon outline. Next I used some blockout white to add some highlights to my bees, to the wings, and to some of the hexagons and flowers. I also thought it would be nice to bring in some of this stardust stickles, and it's a really nice sparkle, so I used that on the wings of the bees and on some of the flower petals. To bring in some of the stickles in a honeycomb shape, I painted the stickles on this foam stampy thing that I had made, and then I pressed it in to the different areas just to transfer the stickles. Next, I brought in some more stamping. This time I was using the vintage photo, and I did mix it up with some of the rusty hinge in some of my stamping. For this layer, I used some postage stamp type stamps. This little one is from a Dollar Tree stamp set that I got, and it has like garden-y things, and I thought it was a really cute little stamp set. And then I have this scripty text stamp, and this time I added some of the vintage photo and the rusty hinge, and then I went ahead and sprayed some of my misty water on it for my mini mister, and just kind of tapped that into different areas. I didn't press down the whole thing in one area. I just wanted to capture a little bit here and there. The mini mister adds a little bit of a watercolor effect to these words. Here's a look at the watercolor, the stickles, how they shine, and just the paint that I put over this jelly print, and the distress inks, and how all the gesso and everything kind of made it flow together. And now it looks like a cohesive finished piece. So these are my completed prints. I've got the muted ones, I've got the jelly print that I turned into kind of like a piece of artwork, and then I've got my other two brightly colored ones that I really like, and I think these turned out beautiful and would look great with some stamping over both of my two different sets of jelly prints. So I hope you enjoyed watching this process, and I hope it inspires you to use gesso and maybe alcohol inks in a new way, to maybe color your gesso like this and bring in some stickles and glitter and mix up your backgrounds and make them look almost completely different if you really don't love how your background or jelly print looks. This would also work really well on a brayer off sheet. So if you had a brayer off that was looking pretty interesting but didn't look complete, you could totally go in with some stamping and some gesso and totally mix it up and add some color, distress ink, whatever, and come up with a totally different background. So hope you enjoy, and thank you for being here, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Happy crafting, y'all!